In the bustling city where life never seemed to pause, Sam, an investigative journalist with a knack for uncovering the strange and sinister, stumbled upon a series of bizarre Craigslist ads that piqued his interest. Each ad seemed normal at first glance, offering mundane items like old furniture, vintage cameras, or collectible records. However, buried in the descriptions were odd, unsettling phrases: "This camera captures more than pictures," or "The record plays the sounds of the past." Intrigued and sensing a story, Sam decided to delve deeper. His first stop was an apartment on the edge of the city to meet a man named Greg, who was selling an antique mirror advertised with the line, "Reflects the truth you refuse to see." The apartment was in a decrepit building that had seen better days, its walls lined with peeling wallpaper and the air filled with a musty odor that made Sam's nose wrinkle. Greg was an odd character, his eyes darting nervously and his hands constantly fidgeting. He led Sam to the mirror, a beautiful yet eerie object with an ornate silver frame that seemed to shimmer slightly in the dimly lit room. "Take a look," Greg urged, stepping aside. Sam peered into the mirror, expecting his reflection. Instead, he saw brief, disjointed images, a shadowy figure lurking behind him, a room he didn't recognize, flashes of red. Startled, he stepped back, bumping into a small table. What was that?" Sam stammered. "It shows things," Greg whispered, his voice trembling. "Things you're not supposed to see." Unease settling in, Sam quickly made his excuses and left. The image from the mirror burned into his memory. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. This was more than just a simple story. His next visit was to a woman named Marla, who was selling an old typewriter. The ad had claimed, "It types what you're too afraid to say." Marla lived in a sunny, well-kept house in the suburbs, a stark contrast to Greg's gloomy apartment. She was warm and welcoming, with a bright smile that put Sam at ease until he saw the typewriter. As he approached, the typewriter started clacking on its own, the keys moving swiftly. "Help me, help me, help me," it typed out repeatedly on the yellowed paper. "How is it doing that?" Sam asked, a chill running down his spine. "I don't know," Marla sighed. "It started a few days ago. I thought it was broken, but then, well, you see." Sam knew he had stumbled onto something far beyond the usual Craigslist scams and weirdos. There was something paranormal at play, something connecting these items. Determined to uncover the truth, Sam collected stories from each seller, his investigation revealing that all the items had once belonged to the same estate, a mansion owned by a reclusive millionaire who had reportedly dabbled in the occult before his unexplained disappearance. Realizing the connection, Sam decided to visit the mansion, located on the outskirts of the city. As he drove up the long, winding driveway, the sun set behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the mansion's foreboding facade. The mansion was a Gothic structure, its towering spires and dark windows creating a chilling silhouette against the twilight sky. Sam's heart pounded as he approached the front door, the air heavy with an ominous silence. Inside, the mansion was a labyrinth of dark hallways and dusty rooms, untouched by time. Sam's footsteps echoed through the halls, the sound mingling with the whispers of the past that seemed to emanate from the walls. He felt eyes on him, watching his every move, but whenever he turned, there was nothing there but the lingering shadow of his own fear. In the heart of the mansion, Sam found a library, its shelves filled with ancient books and manuscripts. A desk in the center of the room held a journal, its pages yellowed with age. As Sam read, the words of the millionaire unfolded, revealing a fascination with the afterlife and a series of experiments designed to breach the veil between worlds. The journal mentioned a final experiment, one that would open the doors to the beyond and unleash truths too terrifying for the mortal mind. The date of the entry coincided with the day of the millionaire's disappearance. As Sam absorbed the chilling revelations, a cold draft swept through the room, and the door slammed shut behind him. Heart racing, he turned to see the shadows coalesce into a dark figure, its form blurry and indistinct. "Who are you?" Sam called out, his voice echoing in the vast room. The shadow did not respond, but moved closer, the temperature dropping with each step it took. Sam felt the air thicken, the very atmosphere charged with a palpable sense of dread as the shadows seemed to swirl around the figure, morphing and shifting as if alive. The figure stopped just short of the light cast by Sam's flashlight, remaining enshrouded in darkness. Sam's mind raced, the details from the journal melding with the terror of the moment. He recalled a ritual mentioned in the faded pages, something about binding the shadows to prevent them from consuming the light. But the specifics eluded him, his fear clouding his memory. "You were seeking truths," the figure finally spoke, its voice a hollow echo that filled the room like cold water. "Yet not all truths are meant to be known. What do you want?" Sam managed to say, struggling to keep his voice steady. "To show you," the figure replied, and with a sweeping gesture, the room darkened further, the shadows growing thicker, drawing in the scant light like a black hole. Sam felt the temperature drop further, his breath visible in the air as frost began to form on the edges of the bookshelves. He backed away slowly, his mind desperately searching for a way out, but the room seemed to elongate, the door impossibly far away. Images began to flicker within the shadows, ghostly scenes playing out in whispers of light and darkness. A woman screaming, a clock endlessly ticking backwards, a child's laughter turning into a cry of horror. Each vision was fleeting but visceral, etching itself into Sam's psyche with claw-like precision. The figure watched, a silent sentinel to Sam's growing horror. "These are the truths behind the veil," it intoned. "The realities you seek to expose through tales and stories. But reality is a fabric easily torn, and beneath it lies madness." Sam, his heart pounding against his chest, felt the edges of his vision begin to blur, the room spinning as the darkness seemed to pulse. He stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the desk, the journal under his hand. His fingers brushed against the pages, and a spark of resolve ignited within him. Grabbing the journal, he flipped through the pages frantically, searching for the ritual. The words danced before his eyes, elusive, but desperation lent him clarity. Finally, his eyes caught on a passage, a chant, a series of symbols, and an offering. Without hesitation, Sam read the chant aloud, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. The symbols in the journal began to glow faintly, an eerie light in the oppressive darkness. The figure recoiled, its form wavering as if in pain. The light. It hissed, its form retreating further into the shadows. Sam continued, repeating the chant, the symbols on the page glowing brighter with each repetition. The room began to lighten, the darkness retreating like the tide going out, pulled back by the force of Sam's will and the ancient words he recited. As the light returned, the visions within the shadows dissipated, the screams and cries fading into a suffocating silence. The figure, its form now less defined, seemed to struggle against the light, its presence dwindling. Sam's voice grew hoarse, but he did not stop until the figure vanished completely, the shadows reduced to mere normalcy. The room was silent, the only sound Sam's labored breathing and the soft thud of the journal closing as he let it fall from his hands. He stood there, alone in the library, the weight of what he had experienced pressing down on him. The room was just a room now, the horrors contained within the pages of the journal and the memories of those who dared to delve too deep. Exhausted but alive, Sam gathered his strength to leave the mansion. As he stepped outside, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the darkness of night giving way to the promise of a new day. But the shadows of the mansion seemed to linger, watching him retreat. Sam knew he had touched something ancient and powerful, something that was not meant to be disturbed. The truth of the Craigslist ads, the items that carried with them echoes of the past, were part of a larger, darker puzzle. He had pieces now, fragments of a truth that was much bigger and more terrifying than he had imagined. As he drove away from the mansion, the rearview mirror reflected the looming structure one last time before it was swallowed by the morning mist. Sam's story was far from over. His encounter had opened doors he could not close, and the shadows, though pushed back, might not be gone forever. The truth was a double-edged sword, offering knowledge but demanding a price that Sam now knew could be steep. What lay ahead was uncertain, the path shrouded in mist and shadows. But Sam was driven, more determined than ever to uncover the depths of the darkness, to expose the secrets hidden by those who knew too much. For now, the pages of his next story were blank, waiting to be filled with tales of the unseen, the unexplained, and the unforgettable. Driving away from the haunting silhouette of the mansion, Sam's mind reeled with the implications of his discoveries. The crisp dawn air did little to clear the fog of dread that clung to him, each mile away from the mansion both a relief and a reminder of the unresolved darkness he left behind. Despite the sunlight beginning to pierce through the clouds, a shadow lingered over Sam, as if the daybreak could not fully dispel the horrors of the night. As the city skyline came into view, the normalcy of the waking world seemed discordant with the nightmare he had just experienced. People went about their morning routines, oblivious to the otherworldly forces that skirted the periphery of their reality. Sam knew better now. He could not unsee what he had seen, nor could he return to the blissful ignorance of before. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from colleagues and friends, the digital chimes stark against the haunting silence that filled his car. Ignoring the barrage of notifications, he drove to his small, cluttered apartment in the heart of the city, a place that suddenly felt too confined, the walls echoing with the faint whispers of the past. Once home, Sam's first act was to secure the doors and windows, a futile gesture that nonetheless provided a slight ease to his frayed nerves. He then pulled out the journal he had taken from the mansion, its cover worn and pages filled with cryptic writings and sketches. The dim light of his apartment cast strange shadows over the text, the characters seeming to dance and twist into sinister shapes. Pouring himself a strong cup of coffee, he settled at his cluttered desk, the journal open in front of him. His hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages, the events of the previous night replaying in his mind like a macabre film. Each entry in the journal hinted at knowledge that was vast and terrifying, a Pandora's box of mythic horrors that had been forcibly forgotten by the world. As the day wore on, Sam dove deeper into the research. He cross-referenced the journal with historical records, old newspaper clippings, and obscure academic articles. The pattern that emerged was unnerving, a series of unexplained disappearances and strange phenomena that traced back to the mansion and its owners over centuries. Determined to find answers, Sam planned a return to the mansion. He knew the dangers, but the story was too big, the mystery too compelling to abandon. Preparing more thoroughly this time, he gathered old tomes on spiritual protection, ritualistic artifacts, and even a digital recorder to capture any auditory phenomena. As night approached, he set out once again to the mansion. The drive was unnervingly quiet, the usual hum of city life fading into a suffocating stillness as he approached the rural outskirts where the mansion lay like a slumbering beast. Arriving under the cover of darkness, the mansion appeared even more foreboding than before. Sam's headlights cut through the fog that clung to the ground, the beams illuminating the gnarled trees that twisted towards the sky like tormented souls. Armed with his equipment and a powerful flashlight, Sam entered the mansion. The door creaked ominously as he stepped inside, the sound echoing off the walls of the vast entry hall. He felt a chill that went beyond the autumn cold, a palpable presence that watched, waited. Setting up his digital recorder, Sam began to document everything aloud, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. Entry 1, returning to the site. The air is thick, charged. I can feel a heaviness, a watchful gaze upon me. He moved to the library where he had found the journal, the room untouched since his last visit. Setting up a circle of salt, a protective barrier according to his research, he opened the journal to a marked page and began to recite a chant designed to provoke spiritual manifestations. As he chanted, the air in the room grew colder, his breath visible in the ghostly light of his flashlight. Shadows seemed to peel off the walls, coalescing into dark figures at the edges of his vision. A low murmur filled the room, words indistinguishable, the voices of the damned whispering secrets not meant for the living. Sam continued, pushing through the growing fear. I seek answers, he declared to the gathering shadows. Reveal yourselves. Speak. The murmurs crescented into a cacophony of voices, the room spinning with spectral winds. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The silence slammed down like a tombstone, oppressive and final. Sam, heart racing, waited. Then, the digital recorder crackled to life, a voice emerging from the static, clear and chilling, you do not belong here. He barely had time to react when a loud crash echoed from the upper floor, as if something immense had broken free. Their house groaned under an unseen weight, the air thick with the smell of decay and ancient dust. Heart pounding in his chest, Sam slowly rose, flashlight in hand, and made his way towards the grand staircase leading to the upper floors. Each step creaked under his weight, adding to the cacophony of eerie silence that seemed to absorb even the smallest sound. Reaching the top of the stairs, Sam hesitated. The corridor stretched before him, lined with doors on either side, each leading to rooms shrouded in mystery and darkness. His flashlight's beam seemed feeble in the overwhelming darkness, barely piercing the thick shadows that filled the hallway. From somewhere within the depths of the mansion, a soft, mournful wail began to rise. It was not just a sound, it carried with it a palpable sense of sorrow and despair, washing over Sam in waves. He fought to keep his composure, reminding himself of the purpose behind his mission here. Stealing his nerves, he chose a door, its wood warped and aged by time. Pushing it open, the room beyond was revealed in the stuttering light of his flashlight as a study, filled with old books and papers, the air heavy with the musty scent of mold. The walls were lined with portraits, each depicting the same stern figure, presumably the mansion's long-gone owner, his eyes seeming to follow Sam's every move. As Sam ventured further into the room, the temperature dropped sharply, his breath now visible in the air. He turned his recorder back on, addressing the unseen forces that he felt converging around him. I am here to learn, not to disturb. I seek knowledge of your existence, he spoke firmly into the recorder, hoping to establish a communication. Without warning, the room darkened as if a cloud had passed over the moon, obscuring any natural light from the outside. Then, the portraits on the walls began to change, their expressions twisting into sneers and frowns, their eyes more accusatory than before. Sam swung around as the door slammed shut with a force that sent a gust of wind rushing through the room, scattering papers like leaves in a storm. Heart in his throat, Sam spun around, flashlight sweeping across the room wildly. In the corner, a shadow detached itself from the darkness, its form tall and thin, almost blending back into the blackness with each movement. Its presence was oppressive, filling the room with a dread that seemed almost ancient in its intensity. "Who are you?" Sam called out, his voice echoing slightly in the cramped room. "What do you want from me?" The shadow did not respond immediately. Instead, it moved slowly, deliberately towards him. As it approached, a cold so intense washed over Sam, making his teeth chatter and his knees weak. The figure stopped just out of reach, and in a voice that sounded like leaves rustling, it whispered, "You have awakened the past, and so you shall inherit its curse." The air around Sam thickened, and he struggled to breathe, as if the very atmosphere was being drawn from his lungs. He stumbled backward, his back hitting the cold, hard wall. The figure loomed closer, its face now inches from his, its features obscured by darkness. "Look," it commanded. Despite every instinct screaming at him to look away, Sam found he could not disobey. He stared into where the figure's face should be, and what he saw was a whirl of terrifying visions, the mansion in its heyday, filled with people laughing and dancing, then changing to scenes of betrayal, a family torn apart by greed, and finally, a dark ritual that bound the spirits of the deceased to the mansion, forever cursed to walk its halls. The visions ceased as suddenly as they had begun, leaving Sam gasping for air on the floor. The figure had receded back into the shadows, leaving him alone with the whispering voices of the past that now seemed to fill the room. Shaken to his core, Sam knew he couldn't leave, not yet. Not without understanding the full extent of the curse and perhaps finding a way to break it. His determination renewed, albeit shrouded in fear, he picked himself up from the floor and prepared to delve deeper into the secrets of the mansion, the true nature of the curse, and how it tied to the strange occurrences linked to the Craigslist ads. As he exited the study, his recorder still capturing every sound, a chilling realization dawned on him. Every room, every corridor, every shadow in the mansion was a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that he was now a part of. The house was alive, in its own haunting way, and Sam was now caught in its web, a player in a ghostly game that spanned generations. The true horror was not just in the hauntings, but in the mansion's desire to make him understand its pain, its loss, and its endless torment. As Sam ventured further into the heart of the mansion, each step seemed to echo with the weight of the secrets it held. He could feel the eyes of the portraits on him, their gazes heavy and accusing, as if they could see into the depths of his soul. With each room he entered, the atmosphere thickened, the air charged with a palpable tension that made his skin crawl. The mansion seemed to unfold endlessly before him, corridors branching off into more darkness, rooms filled with antique furniture covered in sheets like slumbering ghosts. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices from the past that seemed desperate to be heard. They were cries of anguish, whispers of betrayal, and laughter that twisted into sobs. Sam's recorder captured every sound, a digital witness to the spectral phenomena that seemed to engulf him. Determined to find the source of the haunting, Sam descended into the basement of the mansion, the air growing colder as he stepped down the creaking staircase. His flashlight beam pierced the darkness, revealing a large, cavernous space that stretched out beneath the mansion like the belly of a beast. The center of the room was dominated by a massive stone altar, surrounded by circles of faded and worn symbols etched into the floor, evidence of the ritual he had read about in the journal. As he approached the altar, the temperature dropped so drastically that his breath became a visible mist in the air, and his fingers numbed with the cold. On the altar lay an assortment of objects, a rusted knife, a chain made of bones, a book bound in tattered leather, and a series of small, handmade dolls that looked disturbingly lifelike. Sam's eyes were drawn to the book. He reached out, hesitating for a moment before his curiosity overcame his fear. He flipped it open, the pages musty and filled with handwritten notes, diagrams, and incantations. As he skimmed the contents, he realized it was a grimoire, a spellbook used in the ritual to bind the spirits to the mansion. Feeling a surge of dread mixed with an unstoppable drive to uncover the truth, Sam began to read aloud from the grimoire, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. The words felt powerful, vibrating in the air around him as if they were alive. As he chanted, the symbols around the altar began to glow faintly, casting an eerie light in the darkness. The temperature in the room dropped further, and the whispers turned into howls as the spirits reacted to the incantation. The ground beneath his feet vibrated, and the air around him swirled with spectral energy. Suddenly, the center of the altar cracked, a deep, thunderous sound that shook the room. From the fissure, a blinding light emerged, casting long, twisted shadows. Sam staggered back, shielding his eyes from the intensity of the light. When he looked again, a figure was rising from within the altar, its form nebulous and shifting, growing taller and more defined by the second. The figure was terrifying, a manifestation of all the spirits bound to the mansion, their features melding into a single entity of rage and despair. It stared at Sam, its eyes burning with a malevolent fire, and spoke in a voice that was a chorus of the damned. "Why have you summoned us?" Sam, despite his fear, found the strength to respond. "I want to free you, to end this curse," he declared, his voice firm. The entity paused, considering his words, then laughed, a sound that was both mournful and mocking. "Freedom? There is no freedom for us. We are bound to this place, as you now are." Panic surged through Sam as the realization of his fate dawned on him. He had become part of the curse, another soul tethered to the endless cycle of sorrow and torment of the mansion. As the entity approached him, the shadows elongating and reaching out like dark fingers, Sam felt a deep, engulfing sadness, a sorrow that was not his own but that of every trapped spirit within the mansion. With a final surge of desperation, Sam turned to the grimoire, searching for anything that could help him. His eyes landed on a passage, a last-ditch spell that promised to sever the ties binding the spirits to the physical world. With the last ounce of his strength, Sam read the words, pouring every bit of his will into the incantation. The chamber shook violently, the spectral energy swirling around him intensifying. The entity screamed, a sound that pierced the air like 1,000 breaking windows. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The light receded, the temperature returned to normal, and the entity vanished, leaving Sam alone in the silence of the basement. Exhausted and shaken, Sam collapsed on the floor, the weight of the ordeal pressing down on him. He had done it, he had broken the cycle, freed the spirits, at least for now. Lying there, his breath shallow and his body aching, Sam felt the silence of the mansion settle around him like a heavy blanket. It was over, but the cost of his actions was yet to be fully understood. Slowly, he pulled himself to his feet, his muscles protesting with every movement. The basement, once filled with an ominous energy, was now just a cold, empty space. The grimoire lay nearby, its pages no longer glowing, its magic spent. Sam picked it up, tucking it under his arm, a reminder of what he had endured and a token of the knowledge he had gained. As he ascended the stairs, leaving the darkness of the basement behind, he could feel the mansion around him changing. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, and for the first time since he had entered, the house felt just like what it was, an old, abandoned building, not a nexus of supernatural terror. Emerging into the light of day, Sam was greeted by the sight of the sun rising over the horizon, its rays banishing the last shadows of the night. The mansion behind him stood silent and still, its windows catching the morning light, transforming it from a place of darkness into a house of glass and stone. Sam walked away from the mansion, each step lighter than the last, his mind clear but weary. He had faced unimaginable horrors, had spoken with the spirits of the past, and had come out alive. He knew he was lucky to be walking away, and he knew that the story he had to tell was one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Returning to the city, Sam wrote his story, detailing every moment of his harrowing adventure. When published, it captured the imagination and fear of his readers, catapulting him to a fame that was tinged with an undercurrent of dread. People began to look at the shadows a little differently, whispering about the mansion and the journalist who had uncovered its darkest secrets. Yet, despite his newfound fame, Sam often found himself looking over his shoulder, a chill running down his spine whenever the wind howled a little too much like the wails of the mansion. He knew that some doors, once opened, might never be fully closed. His life went on, but the experiences at the mansion had changed him, had shown him the thin veils between worlds and the creatures that lurk in the shadows. He continued to write, his stories a blend of truth and fiction, always wondering when the past might catch up to him, when the shadows might reach out again. And so, as Sam sat at his desk late one night, the wind outside beginning to rise, he couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over just yet. The mansion stood empty now, but it was not forgotten. And somewhere, in the darkness, the spirits he had freed watched and waited, their whispers carried on the wind, a haunting melody that promised their return. For in the world of the supernatural, there is no true end, only pauses in the tales we tell, pauses that wait, patiently, for the next storyteller to turn the page.